true stories
that make us say,
wow, God.
Wow, God.
Wow, God.
I saw a light. It was a perfect, white, blemishless light, and I knew this was God.
When I come back, how do I go through that narrow gate? And the Lord said, the wages of sin is death. Surrender yourself to me daily. And he said, and walk with me.
This was anxiety times 1,000. It was fear to the max. It was physical pain to the max.
Hi, I'm Rob Vischer. In 2010, The Boy Who Came Back from Heaven was published. A father-son duo co-authored the memoir about their family car accident, the then 6-year-old son's coma, and stories the son told about what he saw in heaven during his coma. Slate magazine reports that the book sold over 1 million copies, spent months on the New York Times bestsellers list, and made the co-authors $1 million. Here's the problem. In 2015, the son wrote to pulpitandpen.org and renounced the story. Quote, I did not die. I did not go to heaven, he said. I said I went to heaven because it would get me attention. In a comical twist to a sad story, the father-son duo's last name is Malarkey. For a long time, what some critics label heaven tourism was a big business in Christian publishing. Here are some examples. 90 Minutes in Heaven, 2004. Heaven is for Real, 2010. Flight to Heaven, 2010. To Heaven and Back, 2012. And the list goes on. What makes me cynical about these stories is that there's only one witness in all of them. But what makes me hopeful about them is the book sales prove a lot of people care about life after death. And while I don't take every heaven story at face value, I do take them more seriously when they produce good, lasting fruit in the lives of those who live to tell them. And in our first story, John shares how his friend Santosh, a former Hindu, went to heaven and was never the same.
My name is John Burke, and I am the author of Imagine Heaven and Imagine the God of Heaven. And my story really starts as an agnostic. I studied engineering. I've always been analytical. I thought there's just no evidence for God. Jesus is probably a good human turned legend. And my dad was dying of cancer when someone gave him the very first research on near-death experiences. It coined the term near-death experience. I saw it on his bedside table and picked it up, read the whole thing in one night and said, oh my gosh, like this God, Jesus stuff may be real, because of how many of them were talking about experiencing this God of light who is love and personal, and even Jesus, or knowing they're the same. And that opened me up to start studying the Bible. Well, I came to faith, and not only that, but at the same time, over the last about 40 years, I have had this insatiable curiosity. Like, God, what are these near-death stories, and how do they fit with the scriptures? And there was a lot of confusion for me, quite honestly. And so I kept looking into them and studying them. And now I've studied close to 1,500 of them. And I'll give you a couple examples. One was actually a Hindu manufacturing engineer named Santosh Akarchi. He grew up in India. He had never read the Bible. He had studied the Hindu scriptures. He had a heart attack and coded. And as is common, he found himself up above his body. He thought when you die, maybe you'll come back as another life form, or it's just lights out, but that's not what happened. He said this brilliant light, this divine light, brighter than the sun, came. And I fell in love with that light, he said, because I knew it was for me. And he follows it, and they take this journey, and he ends up coming to this place where he is looking over what he described to me as a gigantic compound. And I've been to India. In India, they have these high-walled, gated compounds everywhere. But Santosh said this was thousands of miles in length, and it was a square shape. And he said, when you die and you're on the other side, your eyesight is like telescopic, like you can see thousands of miles. And he said, I could see in and I could see the people in this beautiful place. The grounds were magnificent. It was mountains and hills and valleys and trees, very much like Earth. And yet there was something about it, he said, that was just magnetic. He said, I knew this place is where humanity is supposed to live forever. And he desperately wanted in. And he said it was surrounded by these beautiful, gorgeous high walls and 12 gates. He said, I counted them because I was looking for a way in. And there were 12 gates, on 3 on each side, all the way around. And he said the gates were closed to me. And he's looking for a way in. And then he looks to his left and he notices he's up on this high platform and he's right on the edge, and he looks down. And what he described, he said, was that if I fell off that, I would fall into an abyss, a hopeless abyss of darkness, and at the bottom, a lake of fire. Again, he's never read the Bible before. And yet here he is perfectly describing the New Jerusalem that John described in Revelation 21, this high-walled city, 1,400 miles, square-shaped, 12 gates. And Santosh, that's his experience in his near-death journey. So he can't go in. He doesn't want to drop into this abyss. He looks to his right thinking, what other options are there? And there he sees to his right a throne. And on this throne, he said, was the Almighty. And he said, I knew this was the Almighty. I didn't have to ask, but in the form of a man, but huge. And he said, I looked up and I looked into his eyes, and his eyes were like lightning, he said. And later he realized that he was probably seeing the risen Jesus, the glorified Jesus. And he falls to his knees because his life flashes before him. He sees it all. And that's a commonality of these near-death experiences, is that time doesn't work the same. It's like Peter said, to the Lord, a day is 1,000 years and 1,000 years is a day. And so they relive their lives. And he sees all of his sins and he says, Lord, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. And he was waiting for the Lord to cast him into the abyss because he knew that's what he deserved. And yet when the Lord spoke to him, he said he was shocked because of the tenderness and the mercy and love in his voice. And he said, Santosh, I'm going to send you back. And Santosh began to communicate with the Lord. Many times it's thought to thought, but heart to heart, it's pure communication. And he saw to the right of this throne a very narrow gate, he said. It was so narrow that it surprised him. And he said it was opened. All the 12 gates around the city were closed to him, but this very narrow gate, surprisingly narrow, was open into the kingdom of heaven. And he said to the Lord, because he was feeling this love and compassion from the Lord, he said, Lord, when I come back, how do I go through that narrow gate? Because when I come back, I want to go through that narrow gate. And they end up having a conversation. Santosh is thinking about religion. He's thinking, what temple or a mosque or church and the Lord said, I want to see how honest you are, how sincere you are with me. I want relationship. And he said, the wages of sin is death. Surrender yourself to me daily in your life. And Santosh said, I should underline surrender. And he said, and walk with me. And then Santosh is back. He revived in the hospital. They thought they couldn't bring him back. He was back. The next 2 years, Santosh is seeking this God of light and love, who then appeared in the form of this almighty man of light. And he's praying every day, God, who are you? You're not like the Hindu gods I grew up with. Who is this God of mercy and compassion and love? Because I knew what I deserved. And he is seeking. And of course, the scripture says, if you seek me with all your heart, you'll find me. 2 years later, his daughter, who was a choral major in college, is invited by a friend who was a Christian to come sing with her in her church. And she invites her dad, and so Santosh goes to hear her sing, and he walks into the church and he feels that same loving presence of God that he experienced in his near-death experience. And then he sits down, and the message that day was on Matthew 7. You can enter the kingdom of God only through the narrow gate. And John chapter 10, where Jesus says, I am the gate for the sheep. Whoever enters in through me will be saved. The thief comes to steal and kill and destroy, but I've come to give them life abundantly. Santosh told me, I went home that day and I started reading the Bible, and everything I experienced, I found in this book. And he became a follower of Jesus and a good friend of mine after I interviewed him. And we would often talk and pray together over the next 2 years after I interviewed him for the book I wrote, Imagine the God of Heaven. And then he went through that gate. Santosh passed away, but he didn't even have to go through the narrow door by the throne. The 12 gates were open to him as a follower of Jesus.
John Burke has 2 books to sell called Imagine Heaven and Imagine the God of Heaven. But he's not just someone who wanted to jump on the heaven tourism bandwagon. He used to be an agnostic. His dad was terminally ill when someone gave his dad a book about near-death experiences. John's curiosity piqued, and he began to explore them, and his research led him to faith in Jesus Christ. In his exploration over the years, John wrote about Heidi, a religious Jew, and the woman in our next story.
I'm Heidi Barr. When I was 16 years old, I had a near-death experience. I was in a very serious horseback riding accident, and I had a challenging childhood up until that point. Although I did always believe in God, and I'm Jewish, I always believed in God, the God of Abraham, and I talked to God every single night. When I was in this horseback riding accident, my horse flipped over backwards down a hill onto me, crushing me. When she hit my chest, I left my body. I found myself 40 feet up in the air, looking down on the scene. I saw my body. I didn't care. I realized my body was nothing more than a shell, a machine built to house my soul, and I didn't care about me. The only thing I cared about was that my sisters were there and they were going to see me die. And I said aloud, or I thought, I wish my sisters didn't have to see me die. They were 14 and 11. And at that moment that I said that, I saw a light shining over my shoulder, over my right shoulder, flowing like water over my right shoulder, lighting up the entire scene, lighting up everything in front of me. And I turned around to look to see the source of this light, and there was a man up there with me, and he was waiting behind me, and I recognized him. This was Jesus. Now, you have to understand, Jesus was a name that was only mentioned in my home as a curse word, or when God was being denied. I was told very regularly that Jesus Christ was the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on mankind. That is what my father believed. So I didn't have an association with Jesus. I knew who God was. I knew the Jewish God. I knew God the Father. I knew who that was. I'd read the Bible. But I didn't know who Jesus was. And there was no doubt in my mind, every cell in my body recognized that this was Jesus. And the minute I recognized him, he moved forward until he was right next to me, and we had a joyous reunion. In fact, I said, "Hi, I know you." And I did. I knew this man. I knew him. It was the greatest reunion in my history. It was the greatest reunion in my life. It was joyous. He was absolutely beautiful. The joy and the love radiating from his eyes was overwhelming. The forgiveness he radiated was overwhelming. And we talked and chatted, and he showed me as we were above my body, which I no longer paid attention. I knew things were happening below me, but I was ignoring that. I was only focused on Jesus. I was only focused on his face, because his face is so glorious and so joyous. So he showed me my life. He showed me my life up to that point. From the time I was formed in my mother's womb, I saw that he had been with me every moment of my life. He showed me the good. He showed me the bad. And rather than judge me and condemn me, he was comforting me, because I judged and condemned my own actions. I, in his presence, evaluated my own actions, and I felt what other people were feeling. If I did something nice, if I did something kind, I felt what the other person felt. I felt that happiness, that joy, that gratitude. If I did something cruel, I felt the sadness. I felt the hurt that I had imparted on that other person. I felt that in my heart, and I felt it from their perspective too. And it was so difficult to live through those moments, but Jesus was there with me, comforting me. And after this three-dimensional life review from start to finish, he took my hand and we left the scene. And it's really difficult to explain how we left. We surfed. It was like flying, but we surfed. We surfed on a wave of light, and we left this planet. We went out into space. I know that sounds nuts. We went out into space. I saw the stars. I saw everything he wanted me to see. We actually stopped at a galaxy, and we stood there, whatever you stand on in space. And I looked at this galaxy, and I recognized it as the Andromeda Galaxy. And I was overcome, and I thought to myself, this is what God sees when he wakes up in the morning. And it's not that I literally thought God sleeps. It's that I realized God sees a much bigger picture, and he has a much better view than we have. As Jesus and I traveled, there was this wave of light rolling under our feet. I looked down, I saw we were both barefoot. We were holding hands. And the wave of light was made up of all colors in the spectrum, and even in spectrums we can't see. And we were going faster and faster. It was almost as if we were approaching the speed of light. That's what it felt like to me. And as we were going faster and faster, all things became one thing. Now, before I had been able to discern individual things, and I realized as we approached a certain threshold, that all things became one thing, in the sense that there was no place in this universe where God is not. We all belong to God. We are his. And as we crossed this threshold, and it was, if you can imagine, it's like crossing through a doorway. That wasn't what it was, but that's the only way I can describe it. And as we did, I saw a light. It was a perfect, white, blemishless light. It took up my entire field of vision. It was infinite in its scope. The light was alive, and the light was love. And I could look at this light. This was the brightest thing I've ever seen. It's the brightest thing you can imagine, but I could look at it, and I knew this was God. Jesus took me directly into the light, and I found myself sitting on God's lap. God, the Father, the really big God. And I was like a toddler sitting on his lap, kicking my feet. I had my arms around him. He had his arms around me. And I have never felt so loved, so accepted, so forgiven. I belonged there. He was my dad. I belonged with him. I couldn't see his face. I did try to look, but his face was shrouded. I could not see it. But I buried my face in his chest, and I would have stayed with him for all eternity. I would have sat on God's lap for all eternity. If someone had asked me, would you like to stay here forever? I would have said, yes, please. Thank you so much. This is where I want to stay. But God kind of moved so that I had to lift my head. And when I lifted my head, he wanted to show me something. I could tell, because when you communicate, it's different. We weren't talking, but you communicate kind of heart to heart. He could read my heart, and I knew what he wanted me to do. He was so infinite in scope that he had to actually withdraw a corner of himself. Imagine this really big God sitting on this really big throne, wearing this really big robe, and that robe extended infinitely in all directions. He had to pull back a very distant corner of his robe. It was infinitely far away in order to show me what he wanted to show me. And the first thing I saw was green grass. Keep in mind, I was nearly blind on earth. My vision was 400 in one eye, 2600 in another eye. So I really couldn't see very well. I could read right here. But I was looking infinitely far away, seated on God's lap. And I could see green grass, a field, an infinite sized field of green grass. This was perfect green grass. Every blade was perfect. And I could see every blade of the grass in that meadow, every single blade. I looked farther and I saw flowers. These were beautiful flowers, all different colors we don't even have here. And my eyes were drawn. I kept returning to this patch of flowers that resembled irises on earth. I couldn't look away from it. And I could see every part of the flower, all the veins in every petal. I could see the grains of pollen on the flower. And I looked further and I could see trees, grove upon grove of trees, massive trees. These were like aspen trees. And I could see every leaf on every tree, and I could see every vein on every leaf on every tree. And I noticed that the leaves were quaking, and I noticed that the flowers were swaying because the grass was singing. The grass was singing the praises of God, and everything was moving in time to the sound of the grass. I was fascinated. My eyes were riveted on this. Everything, light was coming out of everything. There wasn't a light shining on things. The light of God was coming out of everything. So everything was lit from within. And it was just a glorious sight. And I looked a little farther, and a path kind of appeared in this meadow, and it went up a hill, and I could see it got wider as it got to the top of the hill, and I could see people coming towards me. And they too were singing the praises of God. I could not make out their faces. It was as if there was a veil between those people and me. And I'm looking at these people, wondering who they were, and feeling their joy and hearing their song. And suddenly Jesus stood there. Now, when I was with the Father, Jesus was also with the Father. And this sounds so weird, but they're together and they're separate. They're one and the same, and they're different at the same time. Jesus was suddenly standing there beside me, and he said, "You didn't die, you have to go back." And I said, "No, I'm not going back." And I buried my face back in God's chest. He said to me again, and he made me look at him. He said, "You didn't die, you have to go back." And I said, "No, I'm not going back." And the third time he said this, he pulled me off God's lap. He took my hand, and we were standing there. What we're standing on, I don't know, but we're standing there. And he said, "You didn't die, you have to go back." And I started arguing with him and yelling at him, "No, I'm not going back. I'm not going back. I'll feel pain." And when I said that, he took me back. And this time, there was no fun trip. We were just right above my body. He was with me. And I looked down at my body, lying there like a rag doll. I thought, how am I going to get in that body? And I did not want to get into that body. But Jesus shoved me in, and the only way I can describe it is like he pushed me up from underneath my body. I was lying on my side, so it came in from the back of my body. And I hit my face. Whatever spiritual body I had, I hit the inside of my skull. And I was overcome with claustrophobia. I began to struggle inside my body. My body didn't move, but the body Jesus had just shoved in began to struggle inside my body. I have never been so terrified and felt so claustrophobic in my entire life. And suddenly Jesus was in there with me, and he smoothed me into myself. He meshed me together. He made me whole again. He made me one person. And he said before he left, your life is in good hands. And he left me with his Holy Spirit. After he left, I managed to take a breath, crack open an eye, and I saw the ranch owner kneeling down beside me, crying and praying. And I managed to kind of croak out his name. And he picked me up, put me back on my horse, which obviously it's not something you do when someone is in a very serious accident, but he was panicked. He carried me to my car, to our car, threw me in, took my sisters home, took me home, carried me up to my bed. And it wasn't until the next morning, when I still couldn't walk, that my mother realized I actually did need to see a doctor. And I ended up spending a great deal of time. I spent a long time in the hospital, a long time at home, a long time learning to walk again. I didn't have the right care. God healed me. It wasn't a trauma center that I was sent to, and I didn't have the right kind of medical doctors taking care of me. I didn't have any therapists, but I did manage to heal, and I walked again. And it was kind of a miracle, and I consider God my healer. And I told my sister immediately what had happened, but I was pretty shocky and couldn't really talk much for about 24 hours. And when my parents came to see me in the hospital, I told them what had happened. I told them that I met Jesus, that he took me to God the Father, that I sat on God's lap, that I had died and I had seen heaven. My father became so distraught that he actually left the hospital room. My mother stayed with me and said, "Oh, honey, when we're unconscious, we imagine a lot of things." And I said, I wasn't unconscious, I was dead. So the first thing they did was call a psychiatrist, and I told him the same thing, and he didn't have much to say about it. And then they called our rabbi. He said, well, you had a hallucination. And I said, I didn't hallucinate anything. This was the most real thing that's ever happened to me. I met God. I met Jesus. And then he left the room. So I was kind of on my own in the hospital for a month and just got on with my life. I graduated from high school a year early, went to Israel because I really wanted to go. I wanted to go see the places where Jesus had walked. I wanted to walk where he had walked because I figured that's as close as I'm going to get to him in real life, in this life, is to see the places where he had spent time, is to spend time there too. I just spend every day in contemplation of Jesus and thinking about his eyes and his smile and the love and acceptance and forgiveness that he had for me, that we are his family. He made us. We're his family. We're his children. And when I met him, I realized he was my father, my brother, and my best friend all at once. And he would always be with me, even in the bad times. When he said, your life is in good hands, I knew for a fact he didn't mean that I was special and my life was going to be perfect, smooth sailing. It meant in the good times and the bad times, I will be there. I will be there with you. Your life is in good hands, in God's hands.
Have you noticed a pattern in these two stories? Person of a different faith dies, hovers above their body, sees heaven, feels Jesus, and essentially comes back a Christian. In the next story, John Burke tells the same type of story, except for the heaven part.
I interviewed 70 people that I put in this new book, Imagine the God of Heaven. Like Swatik in Rwanda. He grew up Muslim. He ended up becoming an imam, the clerics of the Muslim faith. He would argue with Christians for Islam and why Christianity is ridiculous. And then he got blood cancer in his 20s. And he was 4th stage blood cancer, and he was dying. And his mother was actually Hutu and his father was Tutsi, and it was during the Rwandan genocide. Had divided their family. He had gone through all kinds of just hell, really. And his mother worshiped the goddess Bako. So she went and did all the witchcraft kind of stuff to try to save him. Nothing worked. The father brought all the Muslim clerics and they did everything they could, and nothing worked. And finally, in desperation, his mom heard that sometimes people are healed in Jesus' name. So she goes to the Anglican church there in the village and said, "Would you pray to Jesus for my son? He's dying and nothing will help him." And they said, "Yes, we will. We will fast and pray for 7 days if you will pray to Jesus with us." Swatik dies. So he ends up passing one night, and he said he found himself in this dark room that he said reminded him of like a slaughterhouse. So not every near-death experience is a heavenly one. Some are hellish. And that's exactly what Swatik experienced. These 3 people, creatures, they were very deformed, came into this room with an axe and a bucket and a scythe, and they began to, what he said was to take him apart. That's what they were about to do. When into this room walks a man of light in a white robe and with a beard, and he holds out his arms, and as soon as he walks in, the other 3 scatter. He holds out his arms wide, and Swatik sees what would have been holes in his wrists. And then he knows, because someone had given Swatik 3 free movie tickets, and he had gone there in Kigali, Rwanda, to see these free movies, and one of them turned out to be The Passion of the Christ. And even though he was Muslim and he didn't want to see it, he wanted to get the most for his money. So he knew who this was. And he holds out his hands, and the light coming off of him, Swatik said, pierced into his very soul. And he said to him, "I died for mankind. You are among those I died for. Never deny it and tell it to everyone." Swatik is instantly waking up, sits up, and a sheet falls off his face, and he sees all these people start to scream and scatter, and he's like, what's going on? He woke up the next morning at his burial. He was being buried. He looks to the right, and there's a 6-foot grave next to him, and all these Muslims running scared. And he starts to say to them, "Jesus brought me back. He's here. He brought me back from the dead." And half of them came to faith in Jesus that day. But Swatik ended up becoming an Anglican priest who has now had 7 attempts on his life, and even his father once tried to kill him. God is doing something in our day. And as evil is on the rise, God is on the rise, and he's giving testimony to himself in every nation to show what he did through Jesus was so that every single heart could turn back to him. And when they do, they can be forgiven, and they can know that through those 12 gates, they will one day go.
Like with Swatik, not all near-death experiences are about white clouds and pearly gates. Next up is Kyle's story, which takes us to a very dark place. His story was featured on an amazing storytelling podcast our team loves called Story Partners. We're going to play the first part of Kyle Hubbard's story now, and at the end of the episode, I'll tell you exactly how you can hear the rest of it.
My name is Kyle Hubbard, and I'm from Austin, Texas. Growing up, I never really had a desire to read the Bible or to pray. It was just something we did as a family. School had always come easy to me. I worked hard, but it was still at the same time relatively easy. I remember in first grade, I missed one spelling word all year, and it crushed me. I started crying as a first grader. And so that's how driven I was to succeed and be at the top of whatever I was doing. By the end of high school, I was very, very confident in who I was and what I could offer, with a pretty inflated sense of self-worth. And ended up getting a full ride scholarship to the University of Arkansas, where they paid everything. The party life at a big SEC school that I was fully invested in. Fridays, Saturdays, having huge parties, having hundreds of people over to our house. We would what you call pregame, so you drink before the party, and then you drink as much as you can during the party, and then by the end of the night, you don't know where you're at, and you wake up in a place or a house, and you don't know how you got there. So that was actually pretty typical for myself and some of my friends that were involved in this level. And so it wasn't casual relational drinking, it was full-blown alcoholism. Believers or Christians, I really looked down on. I despised them. I thought they used religion or Christianity as a crutch. I thought they were deluded, deceived, weak. They needed this God to rely on. And I thought they were, of all people, the most to be pitied. It's like those poor Christians. I was living in this really cool party house. We would have hundreds of people over on the weekend. These are really cool guys. I had everything going for me. I was driving a Range Rover. I had a full ride scholarship. I kind of had the life as a 21-year-old, having not really earned any of it, but I was living the quote, the life. And a couple things happened. I started using alcohol by myself. That's when I knew it had a grip on me, and it's not good. I took my first organic honors chemistry test as a pre-med major, a really intense class. And I, just like every other test I'd ever taken in my life, I thought I did really well in it. Well, this is a different level of class, honors organic chemistry. I realized when I turned over that first test, I had failed that test. I got a 65. As soon as I saw that test score and that failure, I realized things are starting to crumble. And then I got caught in a stupid lie with my roommates where I was trying to look really cool and impress my roommates. And I got caught in that lie, and all of them saw me get caught in the lie. So those happened within a few weeks of each other. That really led me into a quick downward spiral where I was waking up with an anxiety attack, or waking up with feeling the heaviness and depression, not wanting to go to class, not wanting to show my face to my roommates around me. So that's when it turned into drinking from morning until night, just to feel not an anxiety attack or not depressed. And so it quickly became a physical addiction, not just a social or an emotional thing, to where I would wake up shaking physically. At the beginning, my parents definitely did not know what was going on. They knew I was definitely not following the Lord and I was partying too much. They definitely knew that, but they didn't know the severity of what had happened and where I was at that point, until one of my roommates called them and say, "Hey, I think something's wrong with Kyle. Like, you should probably investigate." So my parents came up actually in November of 2010, just about a month and a half after I've been in this dark hole. My dad bought me alcohol just to get me to the hospital. And so in that 8-hour drive from Fayetteville, Arkansas to Austin, Texas, I drank a 30-pack of beer. And again, it wasn't to feel any pleasure or joy. It was to stop the withdrawal symptoms in my physical body. That car ride was so bad on so many levels. Being next to your dad, who loved you and raised you and taught you the truth, and him seeing your life literally in shambles, crumbling. And I didn't know what was ahead of me. I didn't have any hope for getting out of this. I knew that they were going to check me into a hospital, but I didn't believe that I could find help or actually be rescued or delivered from this. I get checked into the hospital, and I remember the second night I was there. So this is December 15th, a Saturday night. I'm now 2 days without alcohol. My body is freaking out because all it's known for the last 2 or 3 years is a constant drip. And so I remember it's in the middle of the night, December 15th, Saturday. And I remember my heart starting to beat the fastest I've ever felt it beat before. It was over 200 beats a minute is what it felt like. It felt like my heart was giving its last hurrah, its last go. And it felt like I was having a heart attack. I never had a heart attack before, but I was like, this is probably what is happening. And just this impending fear of death. I felt like death was closing in on me, and these were my last moments. And so my heart goes from beating the fastest I've ever felt it beat before to now it's all of a sudden, it's like out of a movie, time slows down, everything goes into slow motion. I'm now waiting for the next beat of my heart right there in the hospital, and the next beat of my heart doesn't come. All of a sudden my vision goes black, and so I'm just seeing darkness and blackness with no heartbeat. And so I realize at this point, okay, I've died. But why am I still thinking? I thought when you die, you die. I'm a science major, I'm pre-med. When you die, your bodily faculties stop and there's no more existence. There's no more life, right? I'm seeing blackness, I'm seeing darkness. There's no heartbeat. But what was so interesting is that as soon as my vision went black and my heart stopped, everything that I was taught growing up in the church with my parents as pastors, it went from being a fairy tale, false, this is totally made up, these poor Christians that have this false hope, to, oh my goodness, this is all true. And so I knew God was real, the devil was real, heaven was real, hell was real, the Bible was real. And I knew based on my life that I would not be going to heaven. I would be going to hell. I had denied Jesus with my life. I denied him with my words. I had made fun of Christians. I had actively rejected him with my life. And so I knew what my fate was. I went from having dark black vision, that understanding, to descending down at this point. So it's like I was falling, and I fell down into what I call the first level of my experience of hell. In this level, I'm in this dark, dingy, like crack house scene where there's all these other people that have in their life were addicted to something, whether it's drugs or alcohol. It's this dark, dingy room, and everyone is frantically in pain and anxiety and worry. They're all running around this room looking for the thing on earth that they were addicted to satisfy their desire. But there was nothing in that room. There was needles, but there was no drugs. There was probably a bottle, but no alcohol in it. And so there's all these empty hopes, these empty dreams, these people running around. I'm right there with them, looking for anything to get rid of this physical pain, to get rid of this fear. I had anxiety attacks on the earth before that. This was anxiety times 1,000. It was fear to the max. It was physical pain to the max. And there was no substance in that first level of hell, the first level of torment that could satisfy it. And so everyone is just constantly running around looking for it. I was interacting with the people in the room. Actually remember trying to shoot up a drug with someone else, and it just wasn't working. There was no drug. My physical body was on the bed, but I was still in a body, and it was still completely me. I was just in a different realm. And so it was totally like reality. I even explained it's like magnified reality. It was way more real than this conversation I'm having right now with you guys. And so, yeah, that was the first level. The next thing I know, I'm now descending down to a different level. And in this level, it is a dark room. I'm looking at this, what I describe as a demonic grandmother figure sitting across from me, and she's just staring at me. I see half of her face is in the light and the other half is in the darkness. And the half of her face that's in the light is the most beautiful, attractive, almost angelic sight that I had seen. And so at first I thought she was good and that she was for me and that maybe she was going to be a rescue out of this place of torment. But then she turned her face to the side, and it was the most demonic, grotesque, flesh-eaten, evil face that I could imagine. And all of a sudden, these animal figures started to come out of her. One of them was this like massive wolf that was coming out of like her bosom towards me, and it was almost like it was going to eat me alive. And so I remember with this grandmother figure as well, I could hear the voices of what sounded like demonic children in a room just to the next of this room that I was in. And they were asking to tear me apart, to eat me alive, to destroy me. They kept asking this grandmother figure, can we come now? Can we destroy him now? Can we kill him now? Can we eat him now? It was the most animalistic, cannibalistic, beastly, gross, just carnal, evil experience in this room. And the woman kept saying, no, not yet, not yet, not yet. It's like there was something protecting me. She couldn't have access to me, even though she was sitting across from me. There was an invisible protection. Immediately, I was in a different level. And I call this third level a level of reprieve, or a window of grace. So in this third level, I'm now in a different hospital room. It was like I was in a scene from the 1970s, like everything was old and different and kind of nostalgic. There were 3 African-American ladies singing gospel music over me. They were singing praise to God, and it's like they were singing prayers over me. And so I think of Psalm 139, where David says, even if I make my bed in hell, you're still there with me. And so I know I had so many people praying for me. And so even when my heart is stopped and I'm descending into this torment, into this experience of hell, God is still willing and able to show mercy and to answer the prayers of his people for someone like me. These 3 African-American ladies were assuring me that I was going to be okay. They said, you're going to be okay, you're going to make it. But my heart was so entrenched in sin and condemnation. There's a scripture that says, even when our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart. But my heart was still condemning me. I still felt unworthy. I still didn't feel like I should deserve any sort of love or acceptance or mercy or rescue from this place. And so my heart kept condemning me. And so I actually descended. I left that level. I didn't receive the grace or the mercy that was being offered in that moment as my ticket out. I'm hellbound. This is where I'm going to be forever. It's too late for me is what the lie I was believing. I'm in this complete darkness again for this 4th level. And my understanding is I'm going to be here forever.
To hear what happened next, search Story Partners now on your favorite podcast app. Go to Story Partners Season 2, Episode 1, To Hell and Back. Again, that's Story Partners Season 2, Episode 1, To Hell and Back. The links are at the top of this episode description. Just jump to the 31-minute mark on that episode. We have a link for Apple Podcasts and one for Spotify too. Okay, so today we heard about 4 near-death experiences. One you don't know the end of yet, but of the other stories, 2 heavenly experiences pointed a Hindu and a religious Jew to Jesus. One hellish experience pointed a Muslim imam to Jesus. And all of their experiences pointed John Burke, a former agnostic, to Jesus. Sometimes I tend to think that heaven stories are just a bunch of malarkey, pun intended. But when these experiences point me and others to Jesus, instead of just telling me really cool stuff about heaven, it makes me say, wow, God. And when I say wow, God, I mean the one true living God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the one who makes my heart say,
wow, God.
Wow, God.
Wow, God.
My wow God story.
I wanted to share a wow God moment.
That's my wow God story. Praise God.
And I'm so thankful to God for this wow God moment.
So, thank you, God.